Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Low Season Traveller Insider Guides. I'm Jed Brown, your host for this week's episode, and today we're going to hear from one of our community members about one of their low season adventures. Beck Jackjung is one of our Australian listeners, and she recently visited a lesser known part of Brazil for a completely unique experience. Hidden deep in the Amazon jungle is a little known and laid back destination called Alter do Chão, which has some of Brazil's most amazingly pure, powder white sandy beaches. Beck visited in the wet season, which traditionally sees little in the way of tourists, so quite naturally we were keen to learn more about Beck's experiences. Enjoy. So Beck, you are most welcome to the Low Season Traveller Insider Guides podcast. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me. This is awesome.
It's our absolute pleasure. Just for our listeners at home, to paint the picture, you are one of the Low Season Traveller community, and you're based in Melbourne. I was going to say sunny Melbourne, but this time of the year, not so much.
Not so sunny. It's a balmy 11 degrees today, so everyone's rugged up, trying to adjust to the cold temperatures.
Yeah, we were just sort of saying off air how a lot of us always have this impression of Australia as being, this hot sunny place, and in the winter in places like Melbourne and Adelaide and places like that, not so much with the hot and sunny, really.
Definitely not. I think people think of Australia, when they think of Australia, they think of Queensland and Western Australia and the Northern Territory. They forget about the South, which is
they do.
quite cold.
So it's kind of low season in Melbourne right now, right?
It is. Unless you want to go to the snow, then it's peak season.
Yeah, it's fair play, of course. Yeah, we forget about that as well. But listen, we're not here to talk about your hometown today. You reached out to us when we were looking for stories for Low Season Traveller magazine. We were looking for stories that people have got about their travels in the low season months in different destinations that they've been to, and you reached out with a really interesting story for us. Which was about your time in Alter do Chão in Brazil. And we were really intrigued when your submission came in, because first of all, it's somewhere that we weren't aware of. And we're all pretty well traveled here at Low Season Traveller. But also the fact that you were there, it's a tropical place, as we'll get into later. But you were there in the low season, the rainy season, really, I guess. So it kind of piqued our interest, because we know that there are a lot of listeners that look at destinations like the Caribbean, like Central America, Costa Rica, places like that, like Thailand and Malaysia and Vietnam, and even places like India, the Maldives and Sri Lanka. And we know that they are tropical places and they have a wet season, and it's the cheapest time of the year to travel. And a lot of people seem to get put off by the fact, well, it's just going to be raining all of the time, and it's going to be miserable. And a lot of us have been to these destinations during the wet season, and we know that actually it can be a wonderful experience. So with that said, that's why we were really kind of interested to speak to you and to get your story for next month's edition, which I'd urge everyone to read, please. Let's get straight into it. So first of all, tell us, where is Alter do Chão?
Yeah, so Alter do Chão is located in the, I want to say, north central of Brazil. So it's kind of just next to I'd call it a regional hub, maybe, called Santarém. And that's where we flew in. I think it took me about 2 days to get there.
Wow.
Had to fly via Buenos Aires and into Rio de Janeiro, and then one to Manaus. I think we caught a flight to Manaus, which is another regional hub on the Amazon. And then another flight to Santarém, and then there was probably about a 40-minute bus ride to Alter do Chão.
My gosh. I suppose at this point you need to point out to our audience, again, we just sort of spoke briefly about this off air, but yeah, how did you come to be in Alter do Chão? Because it's not the first place we think of when we think of going to Brazil. A lot of people, maybe if they haven't been to Brazil, they think of Sao Paulo, they certainly think of Rio de Janeiro, maybe even Iguaçu. But we don't just immediately think of Alter do Chão. So how did you come to be in Alter do Chão?
Definitely not. So I hadn't heard of it myself. So I was in my first year of studying my master's degree in international development, and I saw an opportunity to participate in a study tour So I applied and I was accepted, and it was just promoted as Brazil. And so I was like, sure, why not? I'll give it a go. And then, yeah, turns out we're going to Alter de Chao, and we're kind of going to surrounding communities as well, which is really cool. And I forgot to mention as well, so Alter de Chao, it's not on the Amazon River, it's on what is called the Tapajos River. And I apologize if there's any Brazilians here and I'm pronouncing things wrong, my apologies. But the Tapajos runs into the Amazon River, just near Santarém. So we were kind of just a little bit south of the actual Amazon River, but it was pretty cool to see the Tapajos, which was like this massive, really wide river as well, which is really cool. It was a really lovely town.
What kind of a place is Alto de Chao? I mean, is it a large place, and why do people typically visit? You know, why would travelers visit Alto de Chao?
Yeah, so from what I've been told, in the peak season, it's kind of the hot spot to go. It's a real popular place with the locals or other Brazilians, because it is, I guess you could, well, it's not on the beach. I think it has very much of a beach town type of vibe in the peak season. However, when I was there, the Tapajos River had swollen, or was I don't know what the word would be. It had swelled.
Yeah. With all the rain, yeah.
And it was really cool because you could see all of the cabana huts from the summer or the peak season, and you could only see their roofs. So in the, I guess, peak season, the river is completely flat, or not flat. There's a little bit of water happening, but yeah, it floods basically in the in the wet season. So I guess people go there in the summer or in the when the warmer seasons, and hang out in the beach, and there's lots of water sports there as well. And lots of, I noticed when I was there, you know, the river was completely swollen and you could barely see the roofs of the cabana huts, but it was lots of fishermen, lots of fishing boats. So I think in the low season it becomes a bit of a fishing village as well. And I don't think I've ever eaten so much fish in my life while I was there.
Really?
So
it's interesting. So it's a destination that really, you know, with its sort of two distinct seasons, you know, in their summer season in Brazil, clearly it's I suppose a typical beach kind of a destination. Then obviously in the winter, when the temperatures drop slightly, was it cold? It's not cold in the winter though, is it?
No, it was warm. Yeah, it was definitely warm. I think I'd say it was probably, you know, on average like 20 to 25 degrees. And then because of it rained, I think maybe once or twice each day, and even then the rain would only last. It was a big downpour for maybe 10 minutes at a time. So that was the extent of it. But because of the rain and the temperature, it was quite humid.
Yeah, sure.
Very humid.
It's interesting though, isn't it? You know, in these places, these tropical places that we go to, you know, years ago, people always used to look at these kind of rainfall charts to see, oh, you know, I don't think it's worth going because it's just going to be raining all of the time. But we forget that in the tropics, first of all, when it rains like seriously rain, but it doesn't rain for long. And I think a lot of people, if they haven't been to the tropics, you know, in even places like we're saying, like Thailand, and certainly places in Central America as well, in the rainy season there, it doesn't rain all day. Like you were saying there, it rains a couple of times for, you know, 10, 15 minutes, but it's more rain than you've seen, you know, in weeks usually. But then it stops.
Massive downpour, and it's like the really heavy drops of rain as well, really big drops.
and I actually think it's pretty cool when you get that kind of rain, especially because it's warm as well. It just doesn't feel as bad as when it's raining, you know, here in Manchester, and I'm sure there in Melbourne. It just doesn't feel the same. It feels kind of okay to be out in it, and you don't mind really getting wet. And sometimes the storms as well can be just awesome, you know, really.
We saw a few electrical storms, and they were wicked. They were very cool.
Absolutely. So what did you do while you were there? You had 2 weeks there. What did you do? Obviously, you weren't there for a kind of a beach holiday because the beach was pretty much submerged. So what were you doing there for the 2 weeks?
Yeah, so I guess we used Alter de Chao as our base, and then we went out. We did a few different activities for a couple of days at each time. So We took a boat to I'm trying to think what it's called. We went to a place called Flona, and I don't remember what it's an acronym, and I don't remember what the acronym is for, but it was like a self-sufficient community on the other side of the Tapajos River. And they, as I said, self-sustaining community. So they made their own honey there. They also, they made their own tapioca flour, and we learned how to make tapioca flour from start to finish. So we had the actual root vegetable and had to, the start to finish process, which was pretty incredible. And one thing which I remember and thinking is very cool is, as we're driving along in our boat along the Tapajos, there was a hospital boat. And this hospital boat, it goes to different communities, and it will stay at the community for, I don't know, maybe like 3 or 4 days at a time, but it's on a schedule. So it stays at that community. The community members, they come, they get their treatments, and then the big boat moves along to its next port, I guess. And it's kind of on a 3-week, or might have been 3 month, I can't remember, but it was on like a schedule. So it would come back every 3 to 4 weeks. So you'd have to wait, if you're from one of those rural communities, you'd have to wait for 3 or 4 weeks until it came back before you could be treated, which is fascinating.
Yeah, isn't it? Just you don't think of that. I think because we are certainly, here in the West, we're so used to having, healthcare on tap almost, really. We don't think of what it must be like in really rural communities. I was actually amazed as well when I was learning more last time I was in Australia about the flying doctors.
Oh yeah, they're great.
Because it's a similar kind of a challenge, isn't it? You've got communities that are really kind of very small communities, relatively cut off from civilization, in inverted commas. Therefore, the only way they have to get medical help is, in the case of Australia, it's the flying doctors, which are absolutely essential. And here, obviously, it's the hospital boats. Yeah, that must have been absolutely fascinating. But what an interesting community, though, that everything is self-sufficient. Did you sort of feel that we have a little bit of still to learn from communities like this, really?
It was for sure. Like they, as I said, every time we ate, it was fish, because it was what they had caught, and we were eating the local like vegetables and fruit that they had made for us and had picked themselves. They didn't have any electricity really either. They didn't have any I guess running water as such. Everything was caught from the rain. And we slept outside in our hammocks, which is pretty cool. And so that was a little taste tester of what was to come. And so after we left Flona, we then journeyed on, I think, further south to a community, and I'm just going to look at my notes, called the Jamarakwa community. And that was another small Indigenous community. And they, for that particular region, they have what's called a para rubber tree. And rubber is one of their main industries in that particular little area, and that was their main source of income. And so they would collect rubber, or rubber juice, I guess you'd call it. And then they would, process it through and create rubber manufacturing items. So I remember I bought some key rings made out of rubber. I've also got a few books that the outsides of the books are made out of this rubber, which was incredible. And so when we were staying in that community, we slept in a bungalow, a 2-story bungalow, and I think we were there for 3 nights, and we slept outside in the bungalows in our accommodation, which was, in our hammock, sorry. Yeah. Which was
was it kind of sheltered though? When you were saying outside, was there a roof over?
There was a roof, yeah. So it was a roof, and it was 2 stories, but it didn't have walls as such. It was kind of open air, which was lucky because obviously it was quite hot at night and very humid. And I remember every night before we'd go to bed, we would just like lather ourselves with, we called it Bushman's here, which is like really hard mosquito repellent and bug repellent. And so we would smother ourselves with the Bushman's, because you lay in bed at night and get eaten alive by mozzies or mosquitoes, which was probably the worst part of it all. But other than that, yeah, and I remember waking up one night and I could hear because we were kind of next to like the jungle, on the outskirts of the jungle, and all I remember is just hearing all the animals. They were just making all their different sounds. There was so many different sounds, and it kind of, I don't know how to liken the sound. It was a very eerie sound because it was in the middle of the night in the dark, and you could just hear all the animals in the jungle. Kind of worried that they'd come out and get me.
It's strange actually. I remember speaking to we've got a guy on the Low Season Traveller team who super guy called Warren, who's based out in Southern Africa, and he's a game ranger. He's a legend of a guy. Fascinating stories that he tells.
Yeah.
But he always says, a lot of people are really surprised when they go out into the kind of the wilderness in Africa. They seem to think that it's going to be totally peaceful at nighttime, and you can't hear a pin drop. And he said, actually, it's outrageously loud because you have the insects and you have the birds and you have the other animals. And he said it's actually, it's really quite loud.
Yeah.
And I guess it's probably similar.
I've been fortunate enough to experience that as well. But yeah, I remember just hearing hyenas and the lions roaring, you hear them getting closer, and then you could hear them getting further away, and you just lie there awake, like, please go away.
Yeah. It's scary, but it's that returning to nature again, isn't it? This is kind of stuff that is so far from our day to day, and that's why we travel, isn't it? That's why we travel, is to reconnect with nature. And it sounds like that's what you did in Alto de Chao. You reconnected with nature in many ways. When you were just saying there about lathering yourself with mozzie repellent, I guess that is possibly one of the downsides of low season travel to the tropics in the wet season. Is it typically does bring out the mozzies, especially if you're near fresh water, which of course you were.
Yeah, definitely. I think every day you wake up with a new bite of something, whether it's a mozzie bite or whether it was a bug of some sort or God knows what. And I guess we're in the small community that we stayed in, the Jamiroquai. And once again, I apologize if I'm pronouncing that wrong. We didn't have any running water, so we bathed in the river, which was pretty cool. There was one toilet, which was for number twos, and if you needed to, go else, you had to find a tree somewhere else, so you had to be careful. But you can't, because it was so humid all the time, and you would be sweating. You constantly felt dirty because the dirt would stick to you, and so you'd have to try and wash it off. So you'd be having a couple of swims in the river a day just to get rid of the so I think that was probably the biggest downside of it all, is just feeling dirty all the time.
Yeah, so this is a little bit more for your sort of your harder core travelers who are really prepared to leave their comforts behind. I bet though, at the end of this trip, when you got home, I bet that feeling when you got into your own bed and had a proper shower and everything else, I bet that was amazing. Eh?
Definitely. In saying that though, I actually really love sleeping in a hammock.
Really?
It was
is it comfortable? I've never slept in a hammock. Is it comfortable?
It is, once you figure out how to get comfortable in one. It kind of, because it gently sways or it gently rocks. And so it's almost like you're a baby being rocked to sleep.
Oh, nice.
But there was just something about it, and you can be quite cozy in a hammock if you have a big enough one, and one that's made, I guess, for sleeping, not just one for decoration. But I 100% recommend, if you ever get the opportunity, sleep in a hammock.
Yeah, fair play.
Outside.
I'd love to do that. Tell me this: what in Alto de Chao, in that region, do they have much in the way of tourism during the low season when you're there? In that wet period, or are the tourists sort of few and far and in between?
To be honest, I didn't see too many tourists. The town that we were in, it was quiet. There was very few other people. I mean, we were certainly the only English speakers in the area, that was for sure, because people would come up to us and assume that we spoke Brazilian, Portuguese.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think in terms of Alta do Chão, no, but there's the other, I guess, towns on either side. So you have Manaus and Santarém, and they're both on the Amazon River. So I'd assume that that would have a little bit more tourism in the low season, just based on their location.
Yeah.
But in saying that, yeah, I think we were probably the few tourists. We're very fortunate though. So I guess one of the reasons that that was probably where we ended up was my university lecturer at the time. So she was Brazilian herself, and she had a friend, I guess, who lives in Alter do Chão, and so she had organised for him to show us around and whatnot. So we were very fortunate to have a local take us around and show us and organise all the incredible things that we got to do. And another thing I forgot to mention was we did a few things when we were in Alter do Chão, and one of them was we learned a traditional Brazilian dance called the capoeira. Hang on, I've got to look at my notes. Where is it? Capoeira, which is I think a Brazilian Afro dance, which is very cool. So we had that. We also had some drumming lessons as well.
Nice.
And then yeah, we got to meet with some local Indigenous women, and they were from the, where are they? Suara do Tapajós, and they were the Indigenous people of that local area.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went to I think it was one of their houses, and they taught us a bit about their culture, and we sang and we danced, and we got some they did some tribal tattoos on us, like traditional tattoos with I think it was a plant that they had mushed up and created an ink with, which was very cool. And that was like an incredible, small but very cultural experience, learning about like the Indigenous people of that area.
I love that.
Which is really cool.
And there's I think there's more different Indigenous tribes within Brazil than I think there are in most countries. I think, you know, a lot of us we forget just how big Brazil is. You know, Brazil is a vast country, and therefore I know that there are just so many different Indigenous tribes, and it's a wonderful opportunity that you had there to experience, you know, just a few of those and how they live, and I suppose how they live, you know, sustainably. You know, really a lot more sustainably than we are. Did you feel any guilt when you were seeing how these people live very happily and very contentedly, from the sounds of it? Did you experience any guilt with regards to knowing what we're doing in the West, you know, environmentally, and what we have been doing for the past 50 or 60 years? Did you experience any guilt associated with that?
I think definitely on my end, I felt guilty for how poorly we treat our environment and we treat our world, and the way that we look at things. Like, as you just mentioned, they were so happy with what they have, and they live off the land and they live sustainably, whereas we're very much one use type, you know, people, I suppose. It's kind of what we've been conditioned to live, and that's just the norm for us, in saying that was the norm for them as well. So I think for me it was an amazing opportunity to see, and it's probably one of my first glimpses at seeing that type of I guess lifestyle. I don't know if you call it a lifestyle, but the way of life, I suppose, and how simple it is. Like, they weren't worried about anything really. They, you know, they spend a lot of their days living off the land and creating in the community that we stayed in. As I mentioned, you know, their main source of income is from rubber, and so they probably just spend their days sourcing the rubber in the wilderness and then creating the products, which was incredible, and then selling it to the tourists, like us. But yeah, so I think guilt on our end from how poorly we treat our environment.
Yeah,
for sure. And we could do so much better.
Oh, we definitely could. I always feel that. I was in Madagascar a couple of years ago, and it was interesting seeing how they live there. And Madagascar's got 80% of the population of Madagascar don't have access to electricity. So it's, you know, it's quite a poor quite a poor country. But what was really interesting is, you're seeing, kids on the pavement just playing in the dirt with little bottle tops, playing football, playing soccer. They were having the time of their lives, And I was with a colleague, and my colleague said, God, it breaks your heart, doesn't it? I feel so sorry for them. And I said, I don't see it that way. I said, I've not seen an unhappy person the whole time I've been here. I think we're putting on them the expectations of our lifestyle because they haven't got, that house, central heating, whatever else, or the latest Nike shoes. We're assuming, oh God, love them, the poor things. They don't seem like they've got a bad life. They don't seem that unhappy with it. And I think that's just interesting as well as you travel, and as you've done as well. You kind of see this, maybe we don't need an awful lot of this crap that we surround ourselves with, that, by the way, is killing the planet. Maybe we don't need that to be happy, because actually, a lot of us in the West, we're not that happy despite having all of this stuff. And it's interesting, but I think that's what travel does, isn't it? It opens your mind and it expands your mind, and you get to experience other cultures, and then you have more of a global approach to life and the possibilities.
Yeah, 100%. I saw my favorite quote is, travel is the only thing that you buy that makes you richer. Yeah. And I think that's like so accurate. Yeah,
I love that. It's that cliche. It's the very best. It's the best education. And I think, this travel experience that you've had clearly left its mark on you. I think so. Would you recommend traveling in the low seasons now? Are you always a low season traveler, or do you sort of occasionally travel in the low seasons when you can, or what's your overall view of low season travel?
When I look at my previous trips, and I've been very fortunate to do a lot of travel, I'd say 80% of them have been in the low season. And I think for me, it's because it's generally cheaper and less crowds. And so I rather go where there's not as many people around as well. In terms of the weather, that doesn't bother me at all. The only time the weather would bother me is if it's a safety thing, like cyclone season. Mm-hmm. But otherwise, I tend to always travel in the low season. There's less people, and things are often cheaper as well.
Which helps.
I would always choose to go in I think April, May for me. If I look back in my calendar, I get little reminders on my social media pages, and it's always, this time 5 years ago you were here, and it's always between April, May, and then usually September as well. Nice. Always off peak.
Nice. I love it. Listen, that sadly is all we've got time for, Beck, for today's podcast episode. But I just wanted to thank you so much for writing into us and sharing your story, which will be featured in next month's Low Season Traveller magazine, but also taking the time to speak to us on the podcast. It's great to speak to one of our community. It's the first time we've spoken to one of our community, so hopefully others will now be coming forward as well. But it was lovely to hear your experiences of low season travel. And listen, thank you so much, and wish you all the very best for your future travels as well, Beck.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure. It was really great. Thank you so much.
So there you have it, another place to add to our burgeoning wish lists, and how wonderful to hear from one of our low season travel community too. You can read Beck's account of her travels to Alto de Chao in next month's edition of Low Season Traveller magazine, which you'll find on lowseasontraveller.com, or of course direct to your inbox if you're one of our very lovely subscribers. We're currently working on issue 2 of the Low Season Traveller magazine, and we're looking for your low season stories too. Have you had any amazing experiences whilst visiting destinations during their low seasons? Perhaps you've had an amazing local interaction which just simply would not have been possible in the busy peak season. Either way, let us know your story by dropping us a line at editor@lowseasontraveller.com, and you may well find yourself in the next edition of Low Season Traveller magazine, and indeed a guest on this very show. But that is our show for this week. Thanks as always for your company, and if you enjoyed this podcast, it would mean the absolute world to us if you could leave us a positive review on your podcast app. We know there are over 50,000 of you out there all over the world, and it would make our day to have a great review from you if you've enjoyed this. You can think of it as your good deed for the day, where you're going to be truly making a difference to a small team. Have a great week wherever you are. Stay healthy, stay safe, keep your travel dreams alive, and don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn to be the first to hear our latest low season stories and guides. Finally, remember that travel is always better and fairer for the planet, the local communities, and indeed you, the travellers, when it's without the crowds.